We're starting our schematic drawing unit, so we're gonna just start with some really basic stuff today. It's just some lines and shapes and kind of putting them together and exploring a little bit with how to draw. Like, you know, you've heard people say, I can't draw a straight line. You've heard people say, oh, I can't even draw a straight line with a ruler. Have you heard people say this? And then you see artists and they're like drawing circles without any template or stencil, and they're drawing straight lines. There's just a certain approach to it that makes it a little bit easier. So we're gonna try some simple drawing approaches. So our first objective, and we're just gonna think kind of like an artist day. So even if you start just by looking around the room, everything that we see that we wanna draw is either some sort of a box, like a square, a rectangle, a circle, or a triangle. Everything. So if you just look around the room, you can kind of filter things out. And I'll call this kind of like using your artist eyes. We see lots of boxes and cubes and rectangles of different varieties. So really basically, and those are all put together just by using lines. So we're gonna start with some lines, okay? So don't take this too seriously. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not using a ruler. I want you to just stay loose. And if you find yourself kind of being too tight with it, try to like grip up a little higher on your writing utensil, whatever you're using to write with. And our first task is going to be to draw some dots down the side of our paper. And you can space them however far apart you want. And then we want to draw about the same amount of dots down this side of the paper. Can you guys stop talking? We're going to go down this side of the paper. So we want about the same amount. They don't have to be exactly across from each other. If they're a little bit wonky, that's okay. So we're just doing some dots down either side of our paper. And if we try to draw, let's just connect this first dot to this first dot over here. And you can do it however it feels comfortable to you. Just do the first one, okay? So try to draw a straight line without using any sort of device. You're just gonna draw a straight line. And was it a little bit wobbly? Was it a little bit curved? So that might be because you're drawing more from like the wrist, moving from the wrist, or even kind of trying to draw with your fingers. This time when we draw a straight line, I actually want you to try to focus on drawing and moving, keeping everything kind of stable. So keeping your wrist stable, keeping your elbow stable, but moving from your arm, moving from your shoulder. So like we're moving our pencil by just holding it here, or marker, whatever you're using, and we're moving from the shoulder joint. So try to do that, and you can have your arm bent, but you're trying to keep everything kind of rigid and stable, and we're moving our pencil or pen or marker from the shoulder. So we're moving like kind of with our whole arm, and it helps to kind of look where you're going first. I'm getting a little bit off track here. And just try a few more. And as you draw these, it should get a little bit easier. You might try to kind of back up a little bit from your paper and make your arm more straight and see if that helps. Once you finish, if you want to try a few more, you can add in a couple more dots. Even just drawing from your elbow can be pretty good, except for it gives you a little bit of a curved line when you draw from your elbow if you move from your elbow instead of your shoulder. You can try that just to see what happens. Everybody's a little bit different, so sometimes different things can work for us. But our goal is to try to get a little bit comfortable with just drawing a straight line first. Go ahead and try to draw a few more. Try not to draw with your fingers moving. Try not to draw with just your wrist moving. Try to draw from your elbow or from your shoulder, and that should give you a pretty straight line. Squares. So we're gonna start by making some dots to connect. And they can be close together. We're kind of just creating some dots that will become our boxes or squares. They can be more rectangular, they can be more square, they can be long and tall, they can be short and fat, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we're just creating some dots that we can connect with those straight lines. And then we're going to connect them. So keeping them in mind, drawing those straight lines, kind of moving more from the shoulder, we're gonna try to draw a straight line, and we can turn our paper to complete that square. So we're trying our best to not like overshoot, so not to have like our line go way longer than it needs to be. We're trying our best to kind of start at one dot and end at one dot. If we go a little bit long, that's okay. If we start to find our lines a little wobbly, pay attention to where you're moving from. If it's moving from the wrist or the fingers, and try to come back to like moving from that whole arm. And try your best to go dot to dot. Once you finish, you can do a few more. Squeeze in a couple more in between. Maybe some smaller ones, maybe some overlapping. We're going to draw 3 points. They can be any kind of triangle you wish. Short, fat, tall, skinny, equilateral, however you'd like them to be. So we're just going to make some dots on our page. And then start connecting those with our straight lines. And feel free to turn your paper as you're working. That can really help sometimes. To rotate your paper as you go. I don't know what my plan was here. Oh, here. And we're trying our best to connect point to point wherever we've drawn those dots for ourselves ahead of time. We're going to start with not touching our pencil or pen or marker down to the paper right away. We're going to do some circles. And circles can be really hard and intimidating to draw without a stencil. So the way that I do my circles and the way that I want you to try today, and this one you can go around a few times in each one, but the way that I draw a circle is I give myself an idea just by hovering the point of my drawing utensil over my paper. I give myself an idea of how large I want that circle to be. So I actually go around and I let this part of my hand rest on my paper, and I go around with the tip of my pencil before I actually touch it down, and I give myself an idea of how big I want that to be, and then I let it touch down. And it's okay if you go around 3 or 4 times. So keeping it more dynamic and less static. We don't want it to be like super rigid. We're moving from the shoulder. So if you watch me draw, just watch my arm. I'm moving everything. I'm keeping everything rigid. My elbow, my wrist, my fingers, everything's in place. And I'm just drawing by moving my shoulder, which is in turn moving my whole arm. I'm keeping it super dynamic. Maybe making few different sizes. If one comes out super wonky, just keep going until it starts to kind of even out, because sometimes that happens. Our next, and we're just going to take those circles and stretch them out a little bit. Try to make some that are more wide open and some that are super skinny and more narrow. Maybe try to make a row of them where it starts larger and they get smaller progressively. Or start small and get larger progressively. Keep in mind you're still moving from the shoulder. I put this together a little bit. So when we think about a square or a box, what we called it really, because it can be more stretched out or more flat, anything that we draw that's a box or square that we would start with. So if we just look around the room, there's a lot of examples around. We would start one of two ways. So how many people have ever drawn a cube before? We all should have, because that was one of our assignments, remember, before we started our last drawing. So how would we start a cube? Or how could we start a cube? Yeah. Square. We could start with a square. So go ahead and try it with a square. So everybody draw a square. And then what would be our next step here to draw a cube? Pardon? Another square behind it. So up and kind of off the top edge, we could draw a second square about the same size. And then we connect the corners with some diagonal lines, right? So if we're gonna draw a box or a desk or a cabinet or whatever it is, or even the tabletop, it's just a flat square or a flat cube, right? What's another way to draw a cube? Anybody else know another way? Yeah.
So you start with the square, but then you do lines instead of a square.
Okay, so let's try that. We're starting with a square. And then instead of drawing another square, we start with some diagonal lines like this.
Yep.
And then we connect those.
Yep.
Mine's a little bit wonky. It's like a box that got squished by Amazon, but that's okay. So we can try that method. Anybody know another method?
Having a disappearing point, like a horizon line.
Yeah, you could get really technical and do it with a vanishing point and a horizon line. So this is the same kind of an idea. If we start with a diamond shape, so kind of a flattened diamond shape, and then we draw some lines coming down from the corners of our diamond, try to make them about the same length. This is the same idea of doing 1 point perspective. And then we connect backwards. So 3 different ways of drawing a box or cube, right? So if we look at the tabletops that we're all sitting at, that's just really a flat cube, right? So how could we start that? Kind of more of a rectangle. So let's try this method, this third method, but a little bit more rectangle. So a little bit longer sided diamond. So we've got longer sides here, shorter sides here. And then if we're drawing the tabletop, we're going to have a very short depth. So just little tiny lines coming down. And then we connect those. Oops. I didn't use my own advice, so I got a little bit of a wobbly line there. All right, so a circle, now 3D becomes a sphere, right? So if we're looking at a circle straight on, we're gonna start with our circle where we kind of estimate it first before we let our pencil or pen touch down. If we're looking at it straight on, we might see some crisscrossing lines kind of going through the center of it this way. But that doesn't feel very 3D, but if we were looking at it straight on, that's how it would look for us, right? If we want to make that feel more 3D, we want to start the same way, kind of starting with that dynamic circle. Don't being afraid to go around a few times and kind of scribble it a little bit, no problem. But then instead of straight lines this way and that way, we're going to do our ellipse. So we're going to do that tall, skinny, or kind of medium, not super skinny, ellipse going up and down, and then an ellipse going side to side. So kind of get it about in the right spot, and it's okay if it's not perfect. The ones that we want closer to us, we can emphasize just by making them a little bit darker once we get them in place. So those look kind of like they're more coming forward. And then the ones that are more scribbly look now like they're kind of in the back of our sphere. And if we wanted to refine that more, we could kind of go around and draw on top of the best parts of our circle, because it's a little scribbly. So we can kind of find the best parts that make it a circle and make those a little bit darker and emphasize them. Now it starts to become a little 3D looking. And then our other main shape is a triangle, right? We tried triangles. So let's try a 3D triangle, which is a cone, right? Like an ice cream cone. So we'll start with an ellipse. And we could have, let's draw a point at the top and middle of our ellipse, and we can connect those lines down like a hat. We could have a very short cone where we start with an ellipse, and then the point is just slightly above the center, and then they connect in. I don't know what that would be like. What is that like? Oh, maybe like a, I don't know, a gardening hat. I feel like some people have like those big gardening hats, right? So that maybe looks like that to you. That could even be the way that you start drawing like a big sun hat, because then from the middle we could kind of start to build up the center and then erase the lines that we don't keep. And then the last shape that we're going to add in, or the last form we're going to add in, is a cylinder. So for a cylinder, we're going to start with 2 ellipses about the same length or width, and then we're going to draw lines coming down the sides. So you could draw kind of a short bat cylinder, like a container of oatmeal, or what else would come in that, I don't know. Or you could draw a tall, skinny cylinder by starting with some smaller ellipses, like a can of Pringles. Try to draw an open box. So again, we can start with that diamond. And then the lines coming down. And then if we want to make it feel like it's been open, like a box from Amazon, we can draw a flap kind of coming off of that. And then we can draw the line coming back towards this end point. We can do the same thing over here if we've got a flap open. And then what angle would that line be? Back towards that way, right? Then we would see the inside of it. And the inside line would come down towards the front point here. And actually, boxes have that extra flap this way, so we could add that in too if we want. It's like a shorter flap. And that one we really wouldn't see probably on that back side.